Welcome to theScore's Fantasy Football Live. I got Justin Boone to my left. I'm Dane Belbeck. Let's go over his bona fides quickly before we get too deep into things. So, this man is theScore's lead fantasy football analyst. He has finished top 10 in the Fantasy Pros Most Accurate Expert competition 6 of the last 7 years. The year you didn't finish top 10, you finished
11th.
Such a disappointment. All of his content right now is on the Score app. You can check out his 2019 Fantasy Football Draft Kit. It's got everything in there you would ever need to win your league. But in case you don't want to read, he's going to tell you right now what's going on.
I feel like with all those accolades, I should have done like the Chris Collinsworth slide in here after you said everything.
I believe he's trademarked that, so to avoid legal problems, we're not going to do that. So, boom, first position up. Actually, you know what? Let's go through general draft strategy for the quarterback position.
Well, I mean, at this point, it's pretty commonly accepted that you should wait on quarterback, right? And after last year, everyone's going to want to be super excited to go out and get Patrick Mahomes. I understand that. And right now, we're seeing his ADP in the late second, in the third round. And listen, if he puts up another 5,000-yard, 50-touchdown season, sure, he's probably going to be worth that. But every quarterback that has put up that kind of year has regressed the next season. Now, what does that mean for Mahomes? That might still mean 40 touchdowns. It might still be a huge year for him, especially now that Tyreek Hill avoided the suspension. He's going to be available. He has all these weapons we're seeing in the preseason. They even have some new players coming in like Mecole Hardman and Darwin Thompson. They are absolutely loaded on offense. So, for me, I'm not going to end up with Mahomes on many teams. And that's strange for me because last year, I was getting him a lot of places because what I like to do in drafts is look for quarterbacks in the 8th, 9th, 10th, in the later rounds, but not until you get to at least the middle of your draft. And the reason for that is there's so much value at quarterback. I would say, Dane, you and I were talking about it, it literally goes about 23 quarterbacks deep this year. And most people play in a single quarterback league. So what that means is you can wait until the end of your draft. You're going to have some stars, some really good quarterbacks this year, not even getting drafted. So don't worry. I put up a draft strategy article earlier this week on the Score, and in that article, I waited until the 12th round before I took a quarterback, and everyone was giving me a hard time. Really, Dak Prescott in the 12th round as your starter? Yeah, that's because in the 3 years he's been in the league, he's been a quarterback one in fantasy every single season. So you can wait very, very late into your draft before you address the quarterback position.
Don't be the guy that takes a quarterback in the third round. Even though you really want Aaron Rodgers, don't do it. Listen to Boone. All right, so if Mahomes is 1, who you got after Mahomes?
There's one guy that I think could challenge Mahomes for the quarterback 1 spot this year. There's a few, but there's one guy in particular that I think has a good shot to do it, and that's Deshaun Watson. And I know the only concern with him at this point is that line, that offensive line. They haven't done enough to improve it. He has to run for his life back there. But when you look at the weapons he has, when you look at how great he's been in fantasy in about a year and a half of play so far, Watson is a phenomenal talent. And he's a guy that I see sometimes fall to the 6th, 7th. He's the only one of the really early quarterbacks that I find myself actually ending up with because he's a value if you're getting him in the late 6th or into the 7th round.
All right, so Mahomes, Deshaun Watson, who's rounding out the podium for quarterbacks?
Aaron Rodgers, and he's a name that everyone is going to want to jump at Rodgers. He had a bit of a down year last season, but we have a new coaching staff in Green Bay, and there's a good chance that we're going to get a bounce back year from Rodgers this season. And I also have Baker Mayfield up. He's all the way up at number 4 right now, and that's also because, we'll talk about him in a second, but Andrew Luck has just dropped down my rankings a little bit because we're worried about that injury. But at Mayfield, we saw how good he was. He was a top 10 fantasy quarterback in the second half of the year last year after they made the coaching change. And look at him now. He's got Odell Beckham Jr. The weapons there are fantastic for him. Also, some questions about the offensive line, but he's going to be a really, really good fantasy option this season. And rounding out that top 5 is Carson Wentz. And this is probably the first player you're going to look at and go, really, that high for Wentz? But 2 years ago, Wentz was an MVP candidate before he shredded his knee late in the season. He was having a fantastic year for fantasy. Comes back last year, played pretty well actually, but he wasn't running the ball because he was still coming back. Less than a year after the knee injury. Now we're going to see him come back this season. The knee's healthy. He'll be running again. We'll talk more about how important that is for quarterbacks in a second. But he's going to be running again. That boosts his value. And the weapons in Philly it's so deep on that offense. They've even drafted J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, so that gives them more depth. They brought in Deshaun Jackson, who is the deep threat that they've really always needed, that Wentz hasn't really had since he got there. And then at running back, now they have some talent. Last year, they couldn't find a starting running back after Jay Ajayi went down. This year, they draft Miles Sanders. They bring in Jordan Howard in a trade. These are reliable backs, and that offensive line in Philly is the best in the league. If you look at our offensive line rankings, #1 in the league.
Okay, one quick thing here. Yes, there's somebody asking, we do always stand this close to each other when we talk about football. We really enjoy each other's company, and we love football, so this is what we do.
We had the same concerns when we started here, don't worry. But in order to do the IG video like this, we got to be this close. And since Dane and I have known each other for a long time, we don't mind.
Here we are. All right, so you gave me your top 5. You said you moved Andrew Luck down due to the injury concerns. Where was he originally? Where do you have him now?
He was at 4. And that Colts offense, they run a lot of plays. Luck is a very good quarterback. But with this injury, we don't know. It seems like he might not be available for the first game. We really don't know what his health situation is because it kind of seems like the team doesn't know what his health situation is at the moment, or at least they're not willing to share it with us. So I moved him down to quarterback 7. I have Cam Newton at quarterback 6. And Cam was a top 3 fantasy quarterback before his shoulder got hurt last season. Really took to that North Turner offense. He has some budding weapons in DJ Moore and Curtis Samuel. So Cam Newton, another value, another guy like Wentz that I'm ending up with in a lot of drafts if you can get him in that 8th, 9th round range. Lux, I'm probably not going to touch him. We'll see how far his ADP falls at this point, and we're going to get a lot of information coming out over the next week or 2 here. But he's a quarterback that, because the position's so deep, you don't need to take a chance on a guy that has these kind of health concerns at the beginning of the season.
Yeah, it seems like he's going to struggle to play a whole season, which you don't want on your fantasy roster. Matt Ryan, number 8, is it the weapons around him that puts him this high?
Well, we can kind of, yes, it definitely does. Ryan's sort of been strange for fantasy because, this makes no sense whatsoever, but he's had a good year and then a bad year, and a good year and then a bad year in fantasy. He's really flip-flopped, and last season, he had a very good season. He was the QB2 overall, so it doesn't have a lot of logic behind it, but could this be a down year for him? The real reason that I have him this low, though, is because, and we might as well get into it now, he just offers nothing on the ground with his legs. And looking at the quarterbacks, I want a guy who has a chance at being a top 5. I want the upside. If quarterback's going to be this deep, you want the upside at the position. And because Ryan doesn't offer that floor with his legs, it's a player that I'm not really that excited about. If we have some injuries in that offense, if we see a Julio go down or something, there's really not that many chances for Ryan to overcome that. So he's a player that I'm not excited about. But if you look just after him on the list, you have Kyler Murray and Jameis Winston. Now, these are kind of plays. I know Jameis doesn't run that much. He ran a little bit more in the first preseason game, so maybe we'll see him add that to his repertoire a little bit more. But Jameis has a chance to lead the league in passing yards in that Bruce Arians offense. He has phenomenal weapons. We're talking about a very strong top 3 pass catchers. Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, everyone's favorite breakout candidate. I'm sure we'll talk about him when we get to the receiver section. And O.J. Howard, their tight end, who probably would have broke out last year if it wasn't for the fact that he got hurt at the end of the season. So Jameis legitimately could lead the league in passing yards this year. That is a possibility for him. And then Kyler Murray, we might be talking about Kyler Murray in a few weeks as the guy that is breaking fantasy football. It's possible because Kyler, he could run for 1,000 yards. He's in a high-volume offense with Cliff Kingsbury. He could throw for a ton of yards. The weapons there aren't the best, but he has a lot of young talent. Christian Kirk's a good receiver. Larry Fitzgerald, more of like a tight end slot guy, but Larry can still get it done. He'll catch a lot of balls in that offense, and they're gonna throw a ton. So Kyler Murray is someone that we're gonna see where his ADP ends up as well because we've seen it moving quite a bit. He's probably gonna get taken in the top 10 quarterbacks, but Murray could, and I'm not saying this because he's gonna throw 50 touchdowns, but when we talk about Mahomes last year, Peyton Manning a few years back, guys that had those just fantastic fantasy seasons, the 50 touchdown kind of seasons, Murray's not going to throw for 50, but he could put up that kind of advantage at the quarterback position. He could be the #1 overall fantasy QB at the end of the year.
And I noticed you have him ahead of Russell Wilson.
And a lot of people have given me a hard time about that. There's some other names too. Drew Brees is all the way down at 13. Do I think that Russell Wilson and Drew Brees are better quarterbacks than Kyler Murray? Absolutely. Would I rather have them in my offense if I had to start an NFL game right now? For sure. But looking at it from a fantasy perspective, Russ was unbelievably efficient last season. We can't bank on that happening again. Now, the thing that could work in Russ's favor is if that defense takes a step back and they've lost some pieces, if that happens, then we might see Russ have to throw a little more. But we saw what the Seahawks want to do. They want to run the ball, and they have two really good running backs to get it done. So I think that we're going to see the efficiency numbers drop a little bit for Russ. We're not going to see him throw for as many touchdowns unless that volume, for some reason, can jump up, which we don't project. And with Drew Brees, Drew is still a great quarterback, but the Saints don't really need his arm now to win these games. They're not throwing for 400 yards a game very often anymore because their defense is really strong, and their running game's strong, and their offensive line is strong. So that's taken a lot of the onus off of Brees, and we don't see him trying to win games with his arm, and that hurts him for fantasy.
A little bit more balanced attack there. Now, interesting guy here, 15, Mitch Trubisky, who you have labeled as a breakout candidate. Why do you love Mitch Trubisky so much this year?
And I will say, Mahomes was my breakout candidate last year, so we nailed that one. Trubisky is a player who a lot of people are going to look at him and say, he's not a very good quarterback right now. And he's not. We can admit that. He's not a very good quarterback right now. He's in a system that produces, and being attached to Matt Nagy, we saw his best year last year. He was a pretty good fantasy quarterback last season. And before he got hurt, of course. Late in the season he got hurt, which is why I think a lot of people are off of him. But he ran for 421 yards. That was a lot of rushing yards for a guy that people don't expect that from. He can get it done on the ground, and like I talked about earlier, that boosts his value up. He's playing an offense where they're going to throw the ball. They also have a lot of weapons in Allen Robinson, Anthony Miller, if he can stay healthy. He's a guy that I really liked coming out. He played through injury last year. They just have a ton of weapons there, and we're going to see, even in the backfield now, somebody like David Montgomery can come in, and in this first season, he could really shake things up in that backfield, take a little bit away from Tariq Cohen maybe, but he can give them something in that passing game as well. So I'm very excited about Trubisky, but a lot of it is because of the system and because he's attached to Matt Nagy.
Everything around him. Now, you mentioned that Trubisky's a good running threat. I got two other guys here to ask you about. 17 and 18, you have Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen.
So these guys are ending up on a ton of my teams this year. And what I want to do is I want to get, and I mentioned it before, I want to get guys that I can get late in the draft, but who could potentially finish as top 5, top 7 quarterbacks. You want guys that have that kind of upside. Lamar Jackson, I said it with Kyler Murray. Kyler Murray could break fantasy. Lamar Jackson's not that far behind him. We saw last year, Lamar Jackson, they rushed the ball more than any team once he got under center. He's going to continue to have a ton of attempts on the ground if he can stay healthy, and we have to assume at this point, we haven't seen anything to make us think otherwise.
Yeah.
I think he can stay healthy. Josh Allen is a little bit different in the sense that they're not going to scheme as much for him to run, but he's another guy that isn't totally all the way developed as a quarterback. So he's going to have to run because he's just going to be scrambling for his life at times, right? The offensive line has been improved around Josh Allen. They brought in some better weapons for him, like John Brown, and the reports out of camp are that John Brown's been really good at adjusting to some of those inaccurate deep balls downfield, right? And that's what Josh Allen's going to need. So we saw late last year, the last 6 weeks of the season, Josh Allen, despite being Josh Allen, was the #1 fantasy quarterback over those 6 weeks. It's possible he could do that again. I don't think he's going to get all the way up there, but I think he's going to make a stride, a step forward as a passer. I also think we're going to see the same from Lamar Jackson. We might see both those guys in the top 10 this season.
Interesting. All right, I got one.
I will say, you can get 2 of those guys too. That is a very good approach. That's something I did last year where I grabbed Mahomes and Trubisky a lot of places. Mahomes obviously came through for me. I was able to get rid of Trubisky, but if you get lucky and both players hit, maybe you can trade one of them away as the season goes on.
And you can wait to draft them, something he advocates for.
You could almost even not draft a quarterback and pick one up the night before the season. That's so many good quarterbacks are out there.
Okay, I got one more quarterback to ask you.
All right.
The GOAT, the man, Tom Brady. You have him 21st overall on your quarterback list, one spot behind former backup Jimmy Garoppolo.
Yeah, the reports about Garoppolo right now are kind of funny because everyone's giving him a hard time. He threw 5 picks, 5 consecutive picks, I think.
The Peterman is what we call him.
Yeah, but also, remember, this is the preseason. This is practice. These guys are trying different things. There was reports like this about Mahomes last year. Mahomes threw 6 interceptions in practice today. Oh my God, well look at he went out and did. I don't think Garoppolo is going to be that kind of quarterback. I'm just saying we got to pull back a little bit on some of those practice reports. Anyway, looking at that system with Kyle Shanahan, They have a lot of talent there. We know George Kittle. I still really like Dante Pettis. I think they're really trying to push him to be a true number one receiver in that offense. They brought in some young guys in Deebo Samuel and Jalen Hurd. So there's a lot of talent around Garoppolo. This is another situation where I'm betting on the system more than I'm betting on the quarterback if I'm taking Garoppolo. But if you look at my rankings, we're talking about how deep the position is. I have Garoppolo all the way down at QB 20. So you probably don't want to draft him. You're probably going to have a chance to get one of those other guys we talked about earlier. I've gotten a lot of flack about Brady being as far down as he is, QB 21. And here's what's going to happen. When you're in your casual leagues at home and you're going to draft, there's going to be a lot of people that see that name, Tom Brady, and they're going to jump to get him. They're going to see these other names, Ben Roethlisberger, Phillip Rivers. Are these guys great quarterbacks? Absolutely. But do you necessarily want them as your quarterback this year? The upside might not be as high as you think. Ben Roethlisberger is losing Antonio Brown, one of the best receivers in the game. Definitely was, I would say, the best receiver in the game during their time together. So he's losing that from the offense. You have Phillip Rivers, who doesn't really have that upside anymore. He seems to always finish in the top 15 quarterbacks in fantasy, but he rarely is going to finish in the top 5 anymore, and I want that upside. And then Brady just doesn't have the weapons right now. How confident can we be? Julian Edelman seems like he'll be healthy when the season starts after he broke his thumb. Edelman, great. He's going to catch a ton of passes this year.
He is.
What else do they have? Are we really excited about the fact he's going to be throwing to James White all the time? We know Gronk's gone. Brady's numbers without Gronk haven't been nearly as good. And on the outside, N'Keal Harry hasn't really stepped up. Jacoby Myers is an undrafted free agent. He's looked really good in the preseason, but I don't know that they're willing to trust him yet. Is he kind of more of he might succeed more in the slot, to be honest, which is where Edelman's going to play. So I'm very concerned about that. And also, the Patriots have leaned towards running the ball a lot more over the last few seasons, and they've been one of the best teams in the NFL at running the ball. And guess what? They're stockpiling running backs. They took Sony Michel in the first round last year. They took Damian Harris in the third round this year. So they know that Brady is nearing the end, and they're leaning on their running game because of it. So I don't know that the volume will necessarily be there. I don't know if the efficiency will be there. I just think there's better options than Brady.
Patriots Nation, keep giving them the comments about Brady being 20.
I am a Bills fan too, so I'm sure they're going to give me a hard time.
Probably don't want to let that be known. All right, so quarterback recap. You got Mahomes, Watson, and Rodgers as your top 3. You got Trubisky as a breakout candidate.
For sure.
Brady, one to avoid. Wait on drafting quarterbacks and look for guys that can add some rushing yards.
Absolutely. And even one guy late that I'll mention before we move on is Sam Darnold for the Jets. He's a guy right now, 23rd in my rankings, but I also see a potential outcome for him where he could finish in the top 12. We saw late last season, the last month of the year, he really came on. He was playing better. Another player that they've tried to surround with more weapons, Le'Veon Bell, a great pass-catching back. Ty Montgomery's someone they're not really talking about that much in fantasy, but he's also a really good pass-catching back, and they talked him up from the team perspective quite a bit. And then they bring in Jamison Crowder to play the slot, and you add that to Robbie Anderson, and Chris Herndon, the tight end, is going to miss 4 games, but they've called him a unicorn. Adam Gase really loves him, so there's a ton of weapons around him. That's how deep I'd be willing to go. At QB 23, that's kind of the cutoff for me. Sam Darnold is a player who I would still be willing to grab him and maybe someone else as my last-ditch effort at quarterback.
All right, let's keep rolling on to running back. Now, again, you can go to the Score app. Check out this guy's rankings. The full fantasy football draft kit is on there. Everything you need to win your league. Boone, running backs, the glamour players of fantasy football. Who you got, and what's your draft strategy?
Well, normally in most years, I want to come away from the first 3 rounds with at least one running back that I'm very confident can be a workhorse for me, can be that true RB1 in my offense. This year, I'd be willing to grab that guy as late as in the 3rd round, Aaron Jones, Kerryon Johnson. You can get one of those guys. I'm pretty confident that those guys could give you RB1 numbers. But, and I don't want to spoil the receiver section at all here, and I talked about this in the Score Fantasy Football podcast yesterday, but receiver is so deep into those middle rounds. You can get starters in the 5th, the 6th, the 7th, even maybe the 8th round, guys that I would be confident having as my wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3, that this year I tend to come out of those first 3 rounds with 2 really good running backs, just because running back seems to drop off a little quicker than receiver does this year. So if you can come away with 2 guys in those first 2 rounds, or even if you want to lean and grab a tight end, you want to grab a Kelsey or a Kittle in the 2nd or 3rd round, Kelsey would be in the 2nd, Kittle, you might be able to get him still in the 3rd, but I've seen him go in the 2nd quite a bit. If you want to reach up and grab one of those guys, I'm okay with it, because you can make up for it by getting receivers in the later rounds or even later in the draft that could potentially get into your starting lineup.
All right, now we got your strategy. I want to know who you're going to take. If you have the first overall pick, you're going running back. Who's the man off the board?
There are 3 options that I would be absolutely okay with. If I had to pick right now, I would take Saquon Barkley. If you watch Saquon Barkley, I know all the jokes about he's a generational talent and everything that the Giants called him, but guess what? He actually is a generational. He is phenomenal. When you watch him, it reminds me of Barry Sanders. And maybe some people won't, remember. Some of our, younger viewers might not remember Barry Sanders, but go look him up on YouTube, because Barry Sanders was the guy that was playing behind a terrible offensive line at times, and he got the ball and he made things happen. Saquon Barkley seems to be able to do that all the time in that Giants offense. And for as bad as I think Eli Manning is at this point, there are some things about that Giants offense that I do like. I think their offensive line is better. They traded for Kevin Zeitler. They've started to address that offensive line over the last couple years here. So that offensive line is a little better. They lost Odell Beckham, which I don't love, because now you're going to have more attention near the line of scrimmage for him. It's not going to be ideal, of course, but I think for Saquon Barkley this year, they're going to put so much volume on him that for fantasy, I think the talent and the volume comes together. That makes him my number 1 guy. But I mentioned 3 guys. Christian McCaffrey, still an excellent pick in those first 3 picks. And a lot of people will take McCaffrey number 1 overall. Another guy who's now facing a lot of competition. Offensive line also has some improvements. Really good offense around him, like we talked about when we mentioned Cam Newton. And then Alvin Kamara. The only thing that puts Kamara a little bit behind those guys, talent-wise, he's right there. It's volume. And even though they lost Mark Ingram, they went out and got Latavius Murray. We've already seen in the preseason. They're going to deploy Murray just like they did with Ingram. And he's not necessarily the same type of player, but Latavius Murray can get it all done. He's very athletic, probably more athletic than Mark Ingram, and he's going to be able to fill that role there. So Kamara won't have the same volume, but from an efficiency standpoint, Kamara's right there with the other 2.
Okay, I noticed the name you didn't mention, Zeke Elliott.
Well, we have to talk about Zeke, and there's a few players right now that we're losing a little bit of confidence in, not because of injuries. We'll talk about some of those guys, like we mentioned with Luck, but in Zeke, in Melvin Gordon, and even Antonio Brown, who we know is going to be back with the team, but is something else going to pop up for Antonio Brown this year? Is there going to be another thing like the helmet issue? It just makes him a little riskier, although now it seems like some of that chaos is maybe put to rest, but we'll see if something else pops up. Sticking at running back, Ezekiel Elliott and Melvin Gordon are both in a similar situation, obviously. I don't know if you would agree with me, Dane, but it seems like Ezekiel Elliott has a better chance of signing a deal before the season. And I don't know if that's just, maybe we're putting a narrative on that isn't actually there, but it seems like the Cowboys need him. That offense is built around Zeke. Some people want to argue it's built around Dak. It's built around Zeke. They need a player like Zeke at running back, and they don't have it. As much as you want to like Tony Pollard, as much as the team is floating things out about Tony Pollard's a good young player, and it seems like he could bring a new element to that offense. But Zeke is a player that they are going to need at the start of the season. They have some easy matchups in the first few weeks. They might try to get away with it without him, but I've moved Zeke down a few spots. I would take him more in the middle of first to late first, because I do think that they are going to get a deal done with him at some point here, either before the year or very, very early in the season. Jerry Jones is not going to let this drag on. I just can't imagine that happening. Now, Melvin Gordon has fallen much further down my rankings. I have Melvin Gordon. I probably wouldn't take Melvin Gordon until the 3rd round. And the reason for that is the Chargers don't seem to need him as much, right? They have a pretty good passing attack there. They have other running backs that have proven themselves. Austin Eckler, even Justin Jackson last season when he got a chance, he stepped up and was able to produce. So Melvin Gordon, we have him on camera last year during the Le'Veon Bell saga saying if I was in that situation, I would do the exact same thing. And hopefully for fantasy, he doesn't, but it seems like there's a chance that we might not see Melvin Gordon for a while here.
Now you mentioned Le'Veon Bell.
Okay.
New team,
yeah.
New offense. He's 9th overall in your rankings.
Not as confident in Le'Veon Bell. I'm more confident in his volume, but there's a lot of question marks about that running game. He's leaving the Steelers, who have had one of the best offensive lines for a while, to go to the Jets, who do not have a very strong line. And they're trying to address that a little bit, but they're bringing in guys that might be on the downside of their career, right? Kelechi Osemele, who had pretty bad season, not an awful season, but it wasn't as good last year. And then they bring Ryan Khalil, the center, out of retirement. Hopefully, those guys are 2 former All-Pros. Hopefully, they have enough that they can boost up that line and help Le'Veon Bell continue to have that same rushing style. Because in Pittsburgh, one of the things that allowed him to have that patience when he was running was the fact that that line was so good, he could wait for those blocks to develop. If in New York, the line isn't as strong and those defenders are breaking through on him all the time, he's not going to be able to dance back there as much, right? So a little bit concerned about that, but from a volume standpoint, he should still be pretty high. We had Mike Tagliere of Fantasy Pros on the podcast yesterday, and I really liked what Tag said. He said, Le'Veon Bell's still going to be an okay fantasy running back for you this year, but is he going to win you your league? No, he's not going to put up another one of those top 5 seasons, so that's the reason why he's a little bit lower, and somebody I don't really find to be getting that much because he's going in the 2nd round.
Okay, another guy I want to ask you about because there's injury concerns, but if he's healthy, he's a stud, is Todd Gurley.
There are a lot of injury concerns about Todd Gurley, but I think people might have overreacted. And the way I've broken it down is, over the last 2 seasons, Gurley has put up huge stats in that offense, including 40 touchdowns in 2 years. So even if we cut that production down by 70%, even 60%, he's still going to end up as a back-end RB1 in fantasy. So everyone kind of was very worried, and he dropped down draft boards and acted almost like his career was over. And sure, they kept Malcolm Brown, who signed an offer sheet with Detroit, and they matched it, and they went out and drafted Darrell Henderson, and both those guys could factor into the offense. But Gurley, though he might not have RB1 overall upside anymore, I still think he can help your fantasy team by putting up low-end RB1 numbers.
Okay. Now, a guy you've labeled as breakout candidate plays for a team that's had 100-yard rusher in the last 5 years. It's Kerryon Johnson. You think he's going to have a big year?
And to be honest, I've gotten a hard time about this one, not because people don't believe that Kerryon's going to have a big year. They think he's too obvious of a breakout candidate. When I originally wrote that article, it was back in May, and that was when they still had Theo Riddick. And I made some of the points then that stand now, which is late last season, Kerryon Johnson started to get more involved in that receiving game. And that was when Theo Riddick was still there. It's one of the reasons why they were able to get rid of Theo Riddick. You look at what he did last year, he put up top 15 numbers during the time he was playing. He's going to come in this season. He would have been a breakout guy last year if he stayed healthy the whole time. So maybe it is too obvious of a pick here. But we're looking now at him having the volume. Even if somebody like C.J. Anderson wants to get involved a little bit. Last year was the first year since 2013 that the Lions had over 400 carries. It's because that's what Matt Patricia, their head coach, wants to do. They double down. They go get Darrell Bevell to be their offensive coordinator. He's someone that's had strong rushing attacks in the past. Kerryon Johnson, he's definitely going to challenge for a top 12 spot this year.
You can read all Boone's breakout candidates in the draft kit if you want to go do that right now while he's talking about them. Guy you do not like, you want us to avoid, Leonard Fournette.
And it's so tough here because I think Fournette's more of a volume-based running back. And some people think he's a great talent, but the way they built that team, they were giving him so much work that he was showing up as a top 10, top 12 running back. But he's had these injuries, and we've had Dane on the podcast in January. I'm sure we'll do it again this year to talk about some of the top college prospects. Dane, you know, going back to college, Fournette's had these lower leg injuries and ankle issues and stuff that have just lingered. They've plagued him every single season. He's missed a ton of time. I just don't have confidence that he's going to be able to start enough games for me in the season. And it's tough to bet on injuries and assume that that's going to happen, even when you're talking about a player that has a long injury history. But I am not confident in Fournette in my lineup, and that's why I have him down more as a low-end RB2, just because I don't think you're going to have him all season.
All right, quick question on rookies.
Okay.
I got 2 rookies targeted here. Josh Jacobs, Oakland Raiders, David Montgomery, Chicago Bears. Which one would you lean towards having a better season?
I think they're going to be very, very similar, and in my projections, they're very close right now. If I had to pick one, I would go with Josh Jacobs. That's because I think he has less competition, and I think the Raiders really want to feed him, and they've said as much. Even when they drafted him, they said he better get ready because we're going to try to make him a workhorse back. Who knows if that's true? There's a lot of coach speak out there, but I think he has a better chance at getting those workhorse numbers. David Montgomery, who I mentioned very briefly before, he has to contend with Tariq Cohen, who's going to catch a lot of passes out of that backfield. So even if his numbers regress a little bit, he's still going to catch a decent amount of passes. And Mike Davis, who they signed in free agency, who played for the Seahawks last year, a pretty good veteran back, who he has a very strange confidence about him in interviews that he is going to have a role in this offense. It doesn't seem like he's just going to be a backup. So I just wonder about the touches, and what we've seen from Montgomery so far has looked really good in practice, even going back to college. I loved him coming out. But looking at him this year, it's just how are they going to divide those touches up in that backfield? Is Montgomery going to get enough of a workload to put up, a top 15 season?
Okay, so running back recap here. Barkley, McCaffrey, or Kamara, you're happy with any of those three at the top?
For sure.
Avoid Leonard Fournette. Maybe go for Kerryon Johnson as a breakout star.
Absolutely. And Aaron Jones, we talk about him on the podcast all the time.
Aaron Jones, big fan here. Again, you can see his rankings on the Score app if you want to check out who he's got where. Moving right along to wide receivers.
Sure, let's do it.
All right, what are you looking for when you're drafting a wide receiver?
Well, like I said, I kind of spoiled it a little bit earlier, but in receiver, I normally like to come away from the first 3 rounds with one top guy. And this year would be the only time in a while that I've veered away from that just a little bit. And that's because if I get on my team, Tyler Lockett, let's say, who's going in like the 4th, 5th round, I would pretty much be happy with Tyler Lockett as my number one. He put up great numbers last season, and we talked about Russell Wilson and his efficiency coming down. Lockett, maybe the most efficient wide receiver season we've ever seen, but we can pencil him in for more volume this year. Unlike Wilson, where we're not totally sure if he's going to have more attempts. For Lockett, he's absolutely going to, because Doug Baldwin's gone. Lockett's going to move to the slot, and now he's going to step up there. He's going to see a lot of work, and even though the efficiency won't be as good, he'll be able to counter that. So having a guy like that as my number one, I'm okay with that. And then you go into the later rounds, and once again, I don't want to spoil too much of the rankings reveal here, but when we're talking about those middle rounds, guys like Mike Williams and Dante Pettis and Calvin Ridley, there are so many guys in that range. Christian Kirk, a lot of breakout guys in that range of the 5th, 6th, 7th, even 8th round. Curtis Samuel, I got in the 8th round the other day. I don't know how long he'll stay there because there's a lot of hype coming out in the preseason about him, but all of those guys could start on your fantasy team as one of your top 3 receivers. So I'm willing to wait a little bit later on receiver this season than I have in years past.
All right, let's hit the rankings up. Now, Odell Beckham goes from the Giants to Cleveland, playing with Baker Mayfield, who you're high on. Does that make Odell the number 1 receiver?
It puts him right in that conversation again. If he was still with the Giants, I would have had a hard time even putting him in my top 5 probably, just because you can't rely on Eli Manning and his arm. And I think we might see Daniel Jones take over this year and realize just how bad Eli Manning might be at this point in his career. But that's a whole other conversation. For Odell, one of the best receivers in the game. We know what he can do. We've seen him put up great stats even with Eli Manning. He gets a big upgrade at quarterback. I have him as my 3rd wide receiver right now, but he's definitely back in that conversation for the number 1 wide receiver overall.
So the top 2, we got Devontae Adams, DeAndre Hopkins.
Devontae Adams, just the model of consistency last season. He was unbelievable for the Packers. And then you have Aaron Rodgers come out this year and say, I want to throw to Devontae even more. So I have no worries at all taking him as the number 1 receiver off the board, just because that's exactly what you want. You want that kind of consistency, and his touchdown upside, double-digit touchdown guy, almost for sure. You can bank it. I don't project that many receivers to have double-digit touchdowns, but Adams is definitely right there.
All right, Julio Jones 4th, kind of goes without saying.
Yeah, you can't. Even everybody last year in the first half of the season, where are the touchdowns? They showed up in the second half of the year.
Yeah, he'll get there. The newly paid Michael Thomas 5th and Juju Smith-Schuster 6th. That's a big jump without Antonio Brown for Juju.
Yes, and there are some questions. Can Juju step up? It's similar, like I said, to the Tyler Lockett thing, where he's going to face tougher competition now because he's going to be the number 1 guy there. But he also will get a little bit more in terms of volume. He was up near the top of the league in targets last year, but he probably will lead the league in targets this season. There's a very good chance that could happen. And Juju, everything we've seen from him since he came to the league, an outstanding talent. Just no reason to go against that. I would almost rather someone stepped up to me and told me why you shouldn't draft Juju Smith, because everything we've seen from him has been positive so far.
You got Tyreek Hill, Mike Evans, Keenan Allen, and Antonio Brown as the next 4 in the top 10.
Yeah, I mean, Keenan Allen is someone that is very strange to me. He was a player that I took in. It's very strange the criticism that I've gotten in talking up Keenan Allen, because I took him in our draft strategy article the other day in the 2nd round, and people, I don't know if he just doesn't have the same name value, or he doesn't seem like he's hyped as much as some of these other receivers, but this is a guy who's completely consistent every year he's been in the league, except for when he's been hurt. A couple seasons ago, he was on like 130 catch pace before he got injured. The last 2 seasons, he's played 16 games each year. They lose Tyrell Williams in that offense. Now those targets are going to get spread out amongst everybody. You're going to have Mike Williams, Hunter Henry at tight end coming back. But that also helps Keenan Allen as well. One of the best route runners in the game. Really like Keenan Allen in that range.
Now, Amari Cooper killed it once he went to the Cowboys from Oakland last year. Do you think that pace continues this year, or do you expect a little bit of a drop-off compared to last year's production?
Well, one of the tough things with him right now is just the injury concerns, and we don't totally know what's going on with him. Initially, they said it was a heel. Now they're saying it's a plantar fascia irritation. That's scary stuff for a receiver, right? Anything going on in the foot region where you have to push off, you have to change direction, all that kind of stuff is concerning. So we're not going to see Cooper in the preseason at all. And we might see him have a little tough start to the year, and I don't know whether this is an injury that he's going to be able to play through because it needs rest and rehab, and he's probably going to continue to try to push it. He wants to get out on that field. So I'm not as high on Cooper at the moment. He actually might drop just a little bit in my next rankings update, depending what we're hearing. From a talent standpoint, though, if he was healthy, he would be right in that range. But because of the injury, not as excited about him right now.
Okay, a guy you are excited about is DJ Moore.
DJ Moore is someone who I think was completely undervalued last season. When you look at what he did once he started getting starter snaps, about halfway through the season, seemed like the Panthers realized we are not going to give Devin Funchess a contract at the end of the year. He's a free agent. So you know what? Let's play our young guys. And that's when DJ Moore and Curtis Samuel started to play a little bit more. And from that point on, DJ Moore was a fantastic fantasy asset. This season, we're going to see a jump. A lot of young receivers coming in. We don't get their best as a rookie, right? It takes a year or two before they really get going. And that's what I think we're going to see from DJ Moore this year in an offense that I think is very strong. I think people are forgetting how good the Panthers offense was because Cam got hurt very late last season. By all signs right now, Cam is healthy. He's going to be fine. And that means that both DJ Moore and Curtis Samuel are excellent fantasy targets.
Look at. All right, a couple guys to avoid. I got Jarvis Landry.
Jarvis,
that's OBJ coming in.
I know, and that's his friend. They have been friends back since they played together in college. And the only thing that could help him here is if Odell Beckham goes to Baker Mayfield and says, you know what, you have to throw to my guy Jarvis Landry. Because Landry, when he was with the Dolphins, one of the things that made him a really good fantasy asset was he was almost like the dump-off option in that offense, right? He was playing in the slot, and he was getting all these short targets and racking up big catch totals. Not great yardage seasons, but huge catch totals. That helped him in fantasy. He goes to the Browns. They paid him like a #1 receiver last year, and they tried him out as a #1 receiver. And efficiency-wise, his catch rate, all that stuff came way down last season. Now, with Odell Beckham in the mix, Jarvis gets to fall maybe more back into an area where he's more comfortable, where he doesn't have to be the #1 guy in the offense. But now you have Odell Beckham, who is going to be the son or the star in that offense that everything is just going to gravitate to, right? He's going to get all the targets now, and guys like David Njoku and Jarvis Landry, they're going to have a harder time putting up big catch totals because they're just not going to see as much volume.
All right, so wide receiver recap. You got Devontae Adams, DeAndre Hopkins, and Odell as your top 3. We're tagging DJ Moore for a huge season. We like him and Curtis Samuel, and we're avoiding Jarvis Landry.
Correct.
All right. Let's move on to tight ends, our last position group. What's your strategy with tight ends? There's a couple that are upper tier. Do you go for them early, or do you wait and get somebody that's lower tier in the later rounds?
Well, I talked about it a little bit a second ago. I would be willing to go with George Kittle or Travis Kelce early. I'm not going to take Kittle in the first round. I think that's still probably a little bit crazy. If Tyreek Hill had been out for the year or suspended for a long time, maybe I would have. But right now, Travis Kelce, early to mid second round, I would pull the trigger there. When you're talking about Kittle, I don't think Kittle's that far behind Kelce. So late second round into the early third round, I'm more than happy if I'm picking in one of those first 4 running backs to come back around and grab Kittle and a receiver or Kittle and another running back, and away you go. That's a great balanced start to your team. So I'm more than willing to take one of those guys. Zach Ertz is still in that elite tier. Led the league, set a record last year for tight ends, 116 catches, right? There's a lot of weapons in Philly. I think the targets are going to come down a little bit. Is Ertz still going to catch a lot of balls? Sure, he's probably going to catch at least 90 balls this season, which is a lot for a tight end. There's not many tight ends that are going to put up those kind of numbers. But that's way down from what he had last year. And I think the biggest area that we might see Ertz get hit is in the red zone. He earlier in his career struggled a little bit scoring touchdowns. He was often around that 4 touchdown range. That's come up a little bit in the last 2 seasons, but now when you're talking about all the weapons earlier, Alshon Jeffrey, Deshaun Jackson, J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, even on his own team, Dallas Goedert, who probably would be a starting tight end on most teams, I don't think that he's going to see the same red zone looks that he saw in the last 2 years. So I think that's where he's going to be hurt and bumped down a little bit further than those other 2 guys.
All right, a guy I got 3 stars beside because you won't stop talking about him.
Okay.
O.J. Howard.
O.J. Howard.
Tampa Bay Buccaneers tight end.
If I had to bet on one guy who's going to join that elite tier this season, it would be O.J. Howard. And another guy who, if it weren't for injuries, we probably might already have him in that top 3. We might already be talking about him as an established star. Do you have to be concerned that the last 2 seasons he's ended the year injured? Yes, that definitely factors in. But in that offense where they lose Adam Humphries, they lose Deshaun Jackson, the Bucs are going to throw a ton. We know Bruce Arians loves to throw the ball. So Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, guess who's the 3rd option now? It's O.J. Howard. Outstanding talent. You look at some of the numbers that he's put up so far in his career, it's right on par with some of the elites coming out. And that's where O.J. Howard could end up. He could be viewed next year. He might be going off the board in those first 2 rounds like I'm talking about with Kittle and Kelsey.
Now, if I scan the tight end stats from last year, there's Eric Ebron got a lot of touchdowns. So I should probably take him pretty high because he's going to do that again this year, right?
Definitely not. Definitely not. And I love Eric Ebron. Bold predictions last season, before the year, one of maybe my boldest prediction that came through was that Eric Ebron would be a top 5 tight end and he would score double-digit touchdowns. I didn't expect 14 total touchdowns. He even had what was classified as a rushing touchdown last year. But this year, one of the reasons that happened last year was because he was sort of the de facto number 2 receiver in that offense. They really didn't have the talent outside of T.Y. Hilton at receiver. This year they do. They went out, they drafted Paris Campbell, who's going to be an exciting young receiver in that offense. They went out and they signed Devin Funchess, who, even though the Panthers gave up on him, he's a pretty good receiver, and he's also sort of the wide receiver version of Eric Ebron. He's the big body guy. He's going to get a lot of those red zone looks. So if you look at Ebron's numbers and you bump them back down, if he only gets 6-7 touchdowns, half of what he got last year, which I think is very possible, especially if Jack Doyle is going to be healthy, and even if Jack Doyle, the other tight end there, isn't healthy, Mo Alley-Cox is the 3rd tight end on the roster. He's been talked up a whole bunch as a potential breakout guy, either this year or next year, when Ebron and Doyle might be gone at that point. So in Dynasty, it's definitely a name that you should be looking at. But Ebron is not going to be anywhere near where he was last year. He's more of a low-end tight end one.
A couple more tight ends I want to get into. Evan Ingram for the Giants. I know Eli's throwing the ball, which isn't great, but I think he's going to have a breakout year. Do you agree with me?
I mean, I think you could say that he had a breakout year in his rookie season, because when everyone got hurt that year, he finishes the tight end 4 that year. And that was just because he saw a ton of volume, something you don't normally see for rookie tight ends. Now, this year, early in the season, you have Golden Tate suspended for 4 games. You have Sterling Shepard, who injured his finger or thumb, he injured his hand, and then he's out there practicing, catching balls, might have re-injured it as well. We don't know if he's going to be available early in the year. Hopefully he's going to be on the field, but his status for the start of the season is up in the air. They don't have much talent. They traded away Odell Beckham. So we could see a start to the year for Ingram like he had a couple of years ago. After that, though, once Tate's back, once Shepard's healthy, I don't think he's going to see that kind of outstanding elite volume that he had when he was a rookie. So he's still up in that range. He's still top 5-6 guy. He's a wide receiver playing tight end for sure, but someone that I'm probably not going to end up with.
All right, so tight end recap. You got Kelsey and Kittle at the top of the board. You love O.J. Howard this year. You're staying away from Eric Ebron.
Yeah, and I think we could mention a couple later guys, because it is a strategy to, if you don't get one of those top guys, you look a little bit later in the draft. Vance McDonald's someone in the middle rounds. I think his ADP right now is probably around the 8th or 9th round. He's somebody that in that Steelers offense, when Antonio Brown left, he left 168 targets. Some of that's going to go to Dante Moncrief and James Washington. They have some other pieces there. But Vance McDonald could pick up some of that. When he's been on the field, when he's been healthy, he's been a pretty good player, pretty good fantasy player. We know Ben Roethlisberger likes throwing to the tight end. They're going to continue to throw. Ben loves to throw in general, and Ben's kind of calling a lot of the shots in that franchise right now. So I think Vance McDonald is someone you could target. I really like Jared Cook this year. I do an article, 7 players are going to lead you to a fantasy title. Jared Cook is the tight end on that list for me. I talked about Ebron in that de facto wide receiver 2 role in the offense. Jared Cook is going to be the de facto wide receiver 2 in that Saints offense. They are so excited to have him. It's the first time they've had a tight end that has that kind of skill set since Jimmy Graham left. There are other receivers outside of Mike Thomas, Ted Ginn, Traquan Smith. I like those guys as well as better best ball players. Traquan Smith has a chance maybe to step up this season and do something, but those guys are more deep ball threats. They're not going to be consistent options where Jared Cook, it is possible that Jared Cook has the Eric Ebron season from last year. He could have that double-digit year playing with Drew Brees, double-digit touchdowns. He could have that kind of season in New Orleans.
The article Boone just mentioned, 7 guys that will help you win your fantasy championship in the draft kit on the Score app. Go check that out. Boone, before we wrap, can I have 3 tips to help me win my fantasy league?
Well, I mean, if you want to just boil it down to the most basic tips, take a tight end early. Grab one of those 2 guys. It gives you such a positional advantage, and Kittle is the one that I want because the value you're getting there, right? And they need him to be basically their number 1 receiver, whereas Kelsey's sort of the 1A, 1B with Tyreek Hill, but draft George Kittle. I think he is a guy at that range of the draft that gives you such an advantage, and he's just a guaranteed fantasy asset in my mind at this point. Wait on quarterback. I think you only need to take 1 because I mentioned you could take 2, but really this year it is so deep. Take 1. Take your pick of the guy you really like, and if you don't get him, grab one of the other guys we talked about. But then look at the waiver wire. If that guy doesn't work out in the first week or 2, you could drop him and go pick up someone else like a Sam Darnold if he's stepping up or someone like that. That's for sure the second. And maybe the most important, I mean, J.J. Zacharyson, late round quarterback fame. He's been on the podcast before. He's built his career. He's an excellent analyst, one of my favorites. But the fact that he's been pushing that late round quarterback narrative, it still makes sense. In expert drafts, you see that the quarterbacks go so late in those drafts, right? There's a reason for it. Now, in home leagues, they probably will go a little bit earlier, but quarterbacks should be going very late. And the last one is, and I mentioned, get at least 1 workhorse running back. You will regret it if you don't. People always talk about 0 RB. It is a strategy you can employ. But right now, there are not that many running backs that are going to be workhorses. And what you want to do is you want to solidify that first running back spot. The second running back spot on your roster, that's the one that maybe you can address as the year goes on. A lot of injuries happen. You can pick up guys off the waiver wire, right? All of that can happen. But you need that 1 star to just lock in the set it and forget it running back, right? You want that on your team, in your lineup, and then you can try as the year goes on, or even in the draft to get those lottery ticket guys where maybe one of them hits and jumps up for you and helps you in your season. Those are things that, like I talked about before, you want to have the elite upside. You want your team to have a chance to be that team that just dominates throughout the playoffs. You don't want to just make safe picks the whole way through, right? Look for that elite upside. That's what's going to lead you to championships.
All right, outstanding. So you can check out all this stuff on the Score app. He's got a podcast. He's got the draft kit, the rankings, everything you need to win your fantasy league. That's all the time we got for today. Thanks for watching, guys.